Woke 1.0 versus Woke 2.0. How the woke crowd have given genuine, proper heroes of social justice a bad name. Is there anything more irritating than the self-satisfied smirk on Greta's face when she was being kidnapped for supporting Hamas, who as a bunch for pure evilness are on par with the Nazis? Their only saving grace is that they're not as efficient as the Nazis were. But social justice activism, which is largely what wokeness is supposed to be about, well, who can argue with that? Who can argue against social justice? Now, probably the most famous social justice warrior of the Woke 1.0 era was William Wilberforce, maybe the most famous after Jesus himself. This was the man who played the most important part in getting the Britain to abolish slavery, and then with the use of their economic muscle and the Royal Navy to force the other countries to do the same. It was one of the most momentous movements in human history, the almost total elimination of slavery that had never happened before. Now, of course, Wilberforce, well, he had an evangelical calling. Slavery was just bad. It had to be stopped. He was a parliamentarian, and over decades of campaigning, he got the British government to stop slaving in its colonies. Cost the British a fortune, but it was the right thing to do. And of course, the whole British public were incredibly behind this anti-slaving movement. The average industrial revolution worker in Britain was woke 1.0 as hell. They applauded the Royal Navy every time they captured a slaving vessel or raided a slaving station. And remember, these woke 1.0 working class people were living in conditions that weren't a whole lot better than slavery themselves. Now compare that with today, when there is still slavery, not on the same scale, but it's still here, even effectively in Western countries. Women abducted, working as prostitutes, even in the West. Where is the woke crowd? Where is Greta? Where are the feminists? Why do they not complain? Where is William Wilberforce 2.0? Bob Hawke and Tank Man. Come forward 150 years or so. The Australian Prime Minister, Labor Prime Minister, reacting to the Chinese atrocities at Tiananmen Square.
Foot soldiers went through the square, bayoneting or shooting anybody who was still alive. They had orders that nobody in the square be spared.
Now, back in the day, the woke crowd in China who wanted social justice and democracy is one of the most important forms of social justice. Well, in those days, the woke crowd stood in front of a tank. Now the woke crowd, now the Just Stop Oil crowd annoy commuters knowing the police will keep them safe by stopping the cars. Now the woke crowd rather chooses to ignore Chinese atrocities, the occupation of Tibet, mistreatment of minorities, the terrible takeover of Hong Kong, and instead they applaud the heavy-handed tactics to control the people, say, after COVID or during COVID, denying the almost certainty that the COVID virus came from the Chinese lab. And China, well, they're definitely having a good time laughing at the woke 2.0 West. Mahatma Gandhi. Back in the day, there were people like my hero, Mahatma Gandhi, who led the movement for India to become independent from British colonial rule. But he preached passive resistance. He almost wrote the user manual on Woke 1.0, as my AI assistant said. Mahatma Gandhi was a key figure in advancing for peaceful resistance, also known as non-violent resistance or civil disobedience, as a means to achieve social and political change. His philosophy emphasized truth force, love force to resist injustice without resorting to violence. This approach involves self-suffering, remember that, self-suffering, and non-cooperation with unjust laws and practices aimed to persuade opponents through peaceful means. Now the woke warriors shout,
"Death! Death to the IDF! Death! Death to the IDF!"
And they all cheered and chanted and repeated it again and again. Woke 1.0 was peace and love and flower power at Woodstock. Now, apparently, 55% of those on the left support the assassination, in some instances, of their political opponents. And the self-suffering aspect of Gandhi is important and missing from the woke 2.0 crowd. They don't suffer at all. They're only prepared, for example, to pay $1 a week to stop climate change. Wow, big deal. I wonder what Mahatma Gandhi would think of the woke 2.0 crowd. Emmeline Pankhurst was one of the many women suffragettes fighting for women's rights to vote, amongst other things. That was woke 1.0's hell in the 1890s. Now we have women fighting for the rights of men to be able to change in women's locker rooms and play their sport. But much, much more important, where are the women fighting for the rights of the women of Afghanistan when the Taliban took over? Where are the woke 2.2 crowd fighting for the Iranians' women's rights not to have to wear a penguin suit? Or the unbelievable and still common practice of female genital mutilation in a whole bunch of countries? Just look at this map and weep. Because the woke 2.0 crowd, they don't give a toss. They're worried about, the glass ceiling or not enough women's politicians. They don't want equal women's representations for, say, bricklayers or sewage workers or the workers in the dirty and dangerous industries. And of course, woke 2.0 will often criticize the only country in the Middle East that treats women properly. Yes, Israel. Israel is the only decent one, but the woke 2.0 crowd have no objection to theocrats like this, but they couldn't care less about these ladies. John Evelyn and Abraham Lincoln and the environment movement. You've probably never heard of woke 1.0 John Evelyn. Perhaps he was the first conservationist of the environment. In 1662, he wrote a paper to the Royal Society calling for the proper management of forests, which were at that time being badly depleted in England. He called for the replanting of trees. Or what about Abraham Lincoln, who established, effectively, Yosemite National Park in 1864, one of the first in the world, one of the most remarkable places on Earth. Now, let just that sink in, the date, 1864. Lincoln and many others at that time were so woke 1.0 that he declared a national park, effectively, in the middle of a civil war. Now we have the mega-rich woke crowd lecturing the proletariat from their private jets. We have the green movement shutting down forestry in Australia and other places so that we're forced to import timber from third world countries with far laxer environmental standards. Same for fish. Australia has closed down most of its fisheries, and despite owning the third largest area of ocean of any country in the world, we now import about 70% of our fish from countries that can ill afford the environmental damage to their countries. This woke 2.0 is just bad for the environment. It's all about virtue signaling. That's what the environment movement has become. Woke 2.0 has killed the conservation movement far more effectively than big oil and big coal and big all the other things ever could do, even if they tried. Kia Hardy for woke 1.0 versus Kia Starmer for woke 2.0. Now, Kia Hardy was just like Sir Keir Starmer, leader of the Labour Party in the UK. He was actually a lead figure in the coal miners' strike of 1912, the first national strike in that country of the coal miners. They were asking for a minimum wage. Awfully woke 1.0, really. And before we get to the present, we should probably mention the infamous coal strike battle in the UK between Margaret Thatcher and the Labour-backed unions in the 1980s, and how the left woke crowd detested Thatcher for bringing an end to what became the mafia-like power of the coal miners. But then, now we have Sir Keir Starmer, who has supported the closure of the last coal mines in the UK and opposes them being reopened. He has managed to do what Maggie could never have done. He's more Maggie than Maggie, but in a hypocritical way. But that's woke 2.0 will do to a Labour leader, all because he's worried that an insignificant amount of the carbon dioxide that the UK produces will contribute 1% to the warming of a climate which will largely make the UK a more pleasant place to live. But what a sellout to the working class men of England, Wales and Scotland. So who would you prefer, Keir Hardie or Kia Starmer? Now, the crime of the woke movement is not just that they seem to be often supporting some very bad causes. It's because they refuse to take on the important ones, such as the mistreatment of women in many countries. And by concentrating on the wrong things, they take attention away from the important things. Now, we need a Wilberforce 2.0, a Gandhi 2.0 and a Pankhurst 2.0, not these pitiful apologies of human beings who have completely destroyed the social justice movement.